Welcome to HPC News Bytes, a weekly show about important news in the world of supercomputing, AI, and other advanced technologies.
Hey Shane, great to be with you. This is our first episode of HPC News Bytes, a weekly show, about 3 to 5 minutes, with quick takes to stay on top of the latest developments, the latest news in the industry.
Awesome.
The top recent story is El Capitan, which will be the third U.S. exascale supercomputer, has begun installation. This is at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. The system will exceed 2 exaflops, and they expect it will be the most powerful supercomputer in the world when acceptance is completed next year.
Not a lot of detail for the configuration and the number of cabinets and nodes and such. We do understand that it's a 100 megawatt facility, of which 15 is allocated for cooling. This joins Oak Ridge, which already has a 1+ exaflop system, and Aurora, which is in the midst of being installed. My take on this is what it takes to be globally competitive these days. I have to also say I have a soft spot for the name El Capitan because the El Cap system that came out of IBM research way back when, of which I was a small part, was standing for Loosely Coupled Array of Processors. And it was one of the first distributed computing parallel systems out there that was providing a lot of performance.
Thank you for that, Shaheen. And so El Capitan is not an unprecedented name in HPC. That's great. Now, speaking of Livermore, the director of the lab, Kim Budil, was named to Fast Company's list of the most creative people in business. Interesting that in explaining the reasoning behind her selection, Fast Company specifically cited the work that Livermore did in nuclear fusion ignition, which was very big news last December. It seemed to be a pretty significant, even if small step toward the realization of fusion energy.
It's further evidence that Livermore rocks because they are in important news this week everywhere. Second, fusion energy is further evidence of supercomputing being so necessary for competitiveness.
Okay, Palo Alto startup Inflection AI announced a 22,000 GPU cluster that they say will deliver 22 exaflops, targeting generative AI.
The H100, the Hopper system, has 67 teraflops of traditional 32-bit performance, but it balloons to 989 teraflops, nearly 1 petaflop, of tensor 32-bit performance. And then you nearly double that when you go to 16, and again nearly double that when you go to 8 bits. Now, all of this comes at a budget of 700 watts, so that's pretty hot. But hey, it's going to give you quite an important hardware moat.
This company has raised a total of $1.5 billion. Nvidia is one of the major investors. And here again, we've seen this in several other instances where Nvidia is investing in companies that have extreme need of Nvidia products. So it's kind of a virtuous financial circle for Nvidia. There was news out of New York State that the state's Department of Financial Services plans to buy an AI supercomputer with the specific purpose to better understand and to regulate AI. We've been hearing about this for 6 or 7 months, that there's a need to regulate AI. So this could be a pretty significant attempt by a major state government.
It regulates, according to their website, something like over 3,000 financial institutions, and that includes insurance, mortgages, banking, on and on, anything that touches money. So it's a pretty big deal, and especially New York being a financial center in the world, but also points out the challenge and the requirement for governments, not just the federal governments, but also for state governments, to keep up with the technology. And I see it as a very good thing. This is what needs to happen before this becomes more common.
But I think we should also note that DFS, this agency, has really given itself quite a task because there's so much brainpower in the private sector companies that are driving it. It's going to be very tough for them to keep up with the fast pace involved here. Okay, now along those lines, the whole confidential computing movement. There's news from Intel today that they're collaborating with Nvidia on attestation services, executing workloads inside of hardware hardened, it's called a trusted execution environment, TEE.
We're all familiar with encryption at rest, with encryption while transmitting data. This is encryption in use. That leads towards like data vault, quantum safe cryptography, key management. These are all pretty significant areas of end-to-end security.
Okay, there are 2 recent stories in the photonics area. There's a startup in Boston called Lightelligence, which announced a new optical network on a chip processor. And also Celestial AI has raised $100 million in Series B funding. Photonics reminds us of quantum computing, where lots of activity, a lot of potential, a lot of promise, and we're kind of waiting for the big breakthrough.
Optical computing is coming. It requires packaging advances because you have to deal with electrons as well as photons.
There was also news in the Linux arena. Red Hat announced they're changing the licensing model for enterprise Linux, and this is causing quite a stir in that community.
It sure is. That's another topic that we're going to drill down into, and that may very well be our next episode. So stay tuned for that.
HPC News Bytes is a production of Orion X in association with Inside HPC. Shaheen Khan and Doug Black host the show. Every episode is featured on InsideHPC.com and posted on OrionX.net. Thank you for listening.